Following is a conversation with Cory Greenberg, a professional cyclist and the founder of Ride for IBD. Cory is a extremely inspirational individual, and in this episode we walk through his journey in getting a diagnosis of inflammatory bowel disease whilst he was training as a professional cyclist. We spoke about the impact of the diagnosis and how he's managed to overcome it. Of course, gut health more generally is the focus of this podcast, so there was a big, long conversation about all the things that he does for his gut health and how he approaches gut health in the context of athletic performance, which is fascinating. As I mentioned, Cory is inspirational, and you'll get that feeling from his energy over the course of the podcast. And I'm excited about the work he's doing with Ride for IBD, where he's using cycling and athletics more generally, peak performance, as a means to raise awareness for the disease, which I think is great. This is Inside Matters. My name is Dr. James McIlroy. Hope you enjoy it. Why don't we get started then with how you got interested in cycling and how it became a profession for you?
Yeah, certainly. So cycling for me was kind of an oddball sport for an American. I ended up falling in love with the sport in around like 2004 because I was watching, of course, at the time, Lance Armstrong, and he kind of captivated the world and captivated America. And so I was 16, 17 years old, sitting in high school, reading his book, watching the tour on TV, and decided after doing like traditional sports for my whole adolescent life, American traditional sports, found that I had this desire to ride a bike. And once I got it, I ended up buying a mountain bike and then later on a road bike, and put a goal in front of myself of doing a race. And that was it. I was hooked. So once I did the race, it was, I ended up winning, which I think was a good indication. Yeah. So, within
That's
my
quite
first year,
unusual, I'm assuming, right? You win your first race.
I had been training for like 3 months, and of course it was like the big, the lowest level of beginner, and I was racing age category at the time, so it was like called juniors, and it's like between 16 to 18 years old was the category, and I ended up becoming state champion that year in California.
Wow.
On the mountain bike, and so I thought that was a good indication, and then started the road bike, and it was just from that point the dream was alive. So I decided, okay, I want to be a professional, and lo and behold, I was good enough early on to get into like those top level development programs. So the sport was thriving in the US at the time. So you had just this plethora of teams that were available to take youth and kind of put them in sort of this development platform and take you all over the country and race almost every weekend, and getting to race against professionals, and then having stints over in Europe. So that happened really early on. By the time I was 18, 19, I was already fully living this lifestyle of an athlete. And that kind of took everything, that I had in terms of like my focus. And then I actually went to college at the same time. My parents really pushed that. So I ended up studying kinesiology with applied fitness, active lifestyle development as my background. So yeah, it kind of all played in. And then here we are, almost
What do these development programs entail? So how intense are they? Are they physical training, mental, racing, nutrition? How do they look?
Oh goodness. Yeah, early on, I say, okay, if you were to ask me that today of what the teams look like today, because really the advancements have come with like the training, the diet, the lifestyle, but let's go back almost 20 years. A lot of it was just mainly exposure. So it's like I think the development back then was like, okay, let's bring in a team of young, talented individuals. We have, team director, there's a management, there's a race calendar that they feel is sort of the best pathway forward to like build these riders up from, their current state to become the best athletes as possible. And so really it's getting these young athletes the experience in these big races, but also races that have the eyeballs of the professional teams and kind of that next step. So for them, it was not a lot of diet at the time, not a lot of kind of insight into the individual in terms of their lifestyle and their kind of training platform that they had underneath them. It was more or less giving them the roadmap, and it's very organized, but everybody had their individual coaches, their individual like training plans. You're supposed to show up to the event ready to go. Where nowadays
Mm.
it's internally, all these teams have the really big ones. Some of the small ones don't, but they all have in-house nutritionist, in-house
Nice.
coaching. They have a methodology, and so it even goes down to like the bike fitting, how you're sitting on the bike. There's sort of a
Okay.
training platform that, yeah, each sort of region kind of comes, education wise from their Olympic background. So like, every country has an Olympic sort of platform that, tailors their athletes to get towards the Olympic games. And so there's that methodology that that particular country might use. And that's what they
Interesting.
educate, because most of these coaches, you have to have a license in some countries, most countries. And so they're trained in their country's sort of platform that gives them the
Wow.
okay, that particular license. And so there's a methodology behind that. So I actually at an early age started getting trained by an Australian. So I think that was a
Okay.
big thing for me, because the US kind of platform didn't work really well for me. And I started getting trained by that Australian methodology, and that really accelerated me. So, but nowadays, yes, yeah, for sure. Diet, exercise, mental health, lifestyle, it's really all
Yeah.
encompassing. So if you want to get to the top level, you have to look at it all.
And is there like a different philosophy for how to become a great cyclist in different countries? Like how you should train, approach races, or is it quite consistent?
Well, I think each country has their own like style of racing. So if you're from Belgium, it's, that is a traditional sport there alongside football, soccer. So there's races all week long. So the development program is like, you barely have to like do, a lot of training. You're actually racing so much during the season. So, it's really cheap. It's very accessible. So you can ride your bike to a lot of these like midweek races, what they call kermesses. And you have the highest level like at your fingertips. So you're watching, like the Flanders region, for example, is so small. You can ride your bike around it in one day. Yet the biggest
Yeah.
races, of the spring are taking place in there. And so,
Way.
you have this, plethora of opportunity. Whereas like in the United States, for example,
Mm.
you have to get on a plane to do a lot of racing. So,
Got
you're
you.
you're
Interesting.
kind of going back and forth. So the mindset and the way that the races are kind of raced are completely different. Big wide roads in the US, tall mountains, whereas, Belgium, flat, hilly, like, cobbled hills, things like that, wind, things that you'd have to, really hard racing. Um, so the methodology is different. The way they train their athletes are different. The way they race is different. So it's country dependent for sure. If you're from like the number one racer in the world is from Slovenia, and Slovenia is, it's the Alps. It's to the south, it's
Yeah.
Croatia. To the north, it's Austria. So they race completely differently. They're really good mountain climbers. And
Is that
uh,
what's his name? Begins with a P.
Pogacar. Hmm.
Pogacar. Yeah.
Yeah,
Watched a Netflix documentary on the Tour de France, and it was epic. So he was there, and there was another guy from Belgium as well who was a sprinter,
yeah. Wout van Aert.
Van Aert. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, so awesome, so
Yeah, so I've
awesome.
raced. I mean, I've raced in all those countries. So I mean, I have an experience of going against those guys.
Okay,
And trying to be competitive against them. But um yeah, it's really country dependent, and the races are all, they vary so much. And then you have disciplines. You have mountain biking, cyclocross. In the US you have criterium racing, which is kind of our number one genre, and that's like we call it
mm,
the NASCAR of cycling. It's maybe a 1 mile course, and it's in a downtown setting, oftentimes at night.
okay.
There'll be 10, 20,000 people watching. It's like high intensity. It's a lot of fun.
Oh,
And so that's a very different genre for us.
got you.
Yeah.
So bringing you back then to your development. So you were clearly gifted. Am I allowed
Mhm.
to say that? Yeah, you
Yeah,
must have had a
for sure.
knack for it, right? You picked up,
Yeah.
and then how did your trajectory progress then thereafter?
Yeah. So development program, it's just like as you're kind of going along and you're racing, you're getting that more exposure, and you start to see this natural progression. And you kind of see it also too with the athletes of who's going to make that next jump. And, there's kind
Mm,
of like, you see it across sports. You're like, oh, wow, that person really, they're stepped up their game, or they're really performing well. And it's just sort of, you kind of have a natural ceiling. And a lot of times you see, someone might have the ability to kind of make that next jump, whereas a lot of adolescent youth kind of plateau. And so I kind of had this natural ability to kind of, I never thought I was a great athlete, until I started recognizing that, like, oh, I'm kind of having these standout performances. And they don't come like, oh my gosh, you just won this race. It's like, you made it with this particular group of highly competitive professionals or really high level athletes in a particular race. And so that starts to come together where it's like that becomes more consistent. And then all of a sudden you do win a race, right? And so there's this natural kind of jump, but then also too, you kind of plateau in certain ways where, there was these key moments of, like, as I started incorporating, more dietary approaches to my training, working with,
Mm.
different coaches and finding the right methodology. All of a sudden, people kind of unlock they see the talent. They see, you can go do a VO2 max test and really get a window into someone's, cardiac capacity, and their lung capacity, and see, like, okay, this person has an engine, but right now maybe they have like a Honda Civic chassis, and we got to develop that chassis, and
Okay. Okay.
and so I had that, but then I was diagnosed at 22 with inflammatory bowel disease, which we can get into because that really kind of was the genesis of where I am today and my mindset and how I approach life, and that reshifted how I approach my training as well, because I got to a point where I could no longer train, I could no longer eat, I could no longer sleep, I couldn't go
Mm.
to school. I was
Ah.
basically living on a bathroom floor, hospitalized eventually, and given an ultimatum. We surgically remove your colon, which is game over for any athletic endeavors at the highest level. We could talk about people who've lost their colon and still do amazing things, but it
Yeah.
was sort of the lifestyle change that was needed, um, and sort of really what shaped the path of my life to this point.
Mm.
So, mhm.
So how did you get your diagnosis, and what happened to you in terms of symptoms, and where were you exactly on your cycling journey? Because you're still
Yeah.
a young
So I was
man.
start
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, sure. So I was starting to thrive as a young cyclist. I started to have those standout performances that we're talking about, and really
Okay.
um starting to create that pathway forward, that realization of, oh, this could be a career. And I actually was at a bike race with my father. Um it was a mountain bike race, and I had this just unpleasant experience in the bathroom. And as you
Mm.
know, we when something's not right in the restroom, we kinda say, "Oh, I have a bad stomach today," or something, but this had, blood involved, and so blood and mucus, that it's kind of graphic, but it is what it is, and that was sort of the first indication that, okay, something's not right,
Mm.
but, I never knew what IBD was. Inflammatory bowel disease was, like, a word I've never even heard of, so I just chalked it up to, okay, I'm just not feeling well. Lo and behold, though, I said something to a family member, and I ended up going to, like, a general practitioner, and this is sort of the disconnect with, the vast majority of, at least in the US, um, when it comes to gut health and the realization of, like, IBD and the colon and what's kind of transpiring in there, there's sort of a disconnect kind of linking those things together, and I was diagnosed with, like, with a hemorrhoid, but it wasn't a hemorrhoid, like, this was a general practitioner who's like,
Interesting.
it sounds like a hemorrhoid. So, okay, fresh blood and things like that could be a hemorrhoid. And then I continued to struggle. And then once my grandmother, who has Crohn's disease, heard about what I was going through, she made that recommendation of, you should see a gastroenterologist. And it was at that moment I went to a gastroenterologist and was properly diagnosed. At the time, it was proctitis, so really low down.
Mm.
And that kind of set the journey. But at the time I was 21, and when you're at 21 years old and you're given like enemas and suppositories, as a method of treatment, it's like one of the most embarrassing and hard things you
Yeah.
ever have to do. So, especially in a sporting environment, you like go tell the team what you're taking. It's like you kind of have to
Yeah.
hide. You hide it. So I never took care of myself. I never took care of the lifestyle. I kind of just brushed it aside. You kind of do that, I think, when you're at that age,
Ah.
and you just push through. And I still had like really great standout performances, but there was this turning point between a season, like we were kind of training in the off season, and it was just something clicked, and I started to go down this like rabbit hole of bad health, and that what started to transpire was like, okay, the fatigue set in,
Yeah.
the bloating. I mean, the common signs of, change in bowel habits. And then all of a sudden, you're struggling to eat. You're struggling to ride your bike. I was just kind of keeled in pain on the couch, couldn't, and then there was this standout moment where I was like, I had done so well at this particular race the year before, and I had to call a team and say, I can't make it this year. And within like
Well,
2 weeks, I was hospitalized. So it was just this rapid progression of like, even like they gave prednisone to try to stop, and that didn't do anything. And within a couple of days, I was laying in a hospital bed. So it was this realization at that time of like, okay, something is not right. And you're stuck in a hospital bed. You get a colonoscopy done in the hospital, and the ultimatum was, okay, you're in a bad way. We need to either remove your colon or we got to start, a biologic, a really hardcore medication. And luckily for me, it was like, okay, the medication worked. But then I had this realization of, all right, I had this cry and was like, all right, well, life sucks right now. And, my dreams are destroyed. But then I said, like, no, like I'm going to fight back. And what I knew was I had to learn what IBD was, what my gut was going through, and ultimately um, kind of take the approach that I had as an athlete. Because as an athlete, we look at the body as a whole. Like we try to get to the finish line because, that's the ultimate goal. But in order to do that, it's not just about your training. It's about your lifestyle. It's about your mental side. It's about your diet. It's the
yep.
equipment you use, the people you work with. And that's the same thing I use to approach IBD. And so that kind of changed my complete narrative of, no, I'm going to beat this. I'm going to move forward, but I'm going to use the tools at hand. And then I had to put together this team of, people to help me, and the products and the lifestyle changes necessary. And then here we are, over a decade later in remission, since that point. And so
Wow.
having a
That's
professional
amazing.
career and
That's
now having
amazing.
Ride for IBD. So yeah, that's sort of the genesis of it all.
And what was you mentioned, which I thought was quite an impactful thing to say, that it's not possible to compete at the very top level if you have a stoma or you've had some resection of your intestinal tract. Could you just walk for listeners through that? And
Yeah, I mean, look, it's so, I mean, I'm not saying it's physically impossible to the degree of like it can't be done, but and I have a person that we support through Ride for IBD that could, challenge that sort of narrative, who had his colon removed. But the hurdles that you have to overcome,
Mm,
whether it's how you retain, fluids,
yeah,
how,
yeah,
being in heated environments, not having a colon, it really, really changes things. Your immune system, the compromised immune system, the
yep, yep,
fatigue, the medications necessary to kind of keep the body from attacking, the J pouch, or,
yeah.
just, it adds so many
Makes it a huge
layers.
amount harder.
It's
Yeah.
incredibly difficult. But I think the thing is that, I think if you're going through something like that, um, you have the realization that I think your perspective changes. I think from what I've seen and the people I've worked with, it's like they're kind of not maybe fixated on becoming a professional. They're kind of fixated on just having quality of life returned,
Yep.
and I'm not here to like say that you can't do any of that, because we have a guy named Corey Fleming who's part of Ride for IBD, who
Mhm.
got top 20 at Lake Placid
Yeah.
Ironman 6 months after
Voila.
his colon was removed. And so, this age category, and like he's doing crazy stuff. And but he's also, a very special person. That's, I remember, right after he had his colon removed, he's on, IV uh at the house trying to get his nutrition in, and the guy's sitting on a trainer spinning his legs on a bike. So he's 2 weeks, yeah, he's just like, I was like, dude, chill out a bit. But no,
Wow.
he's, yeah, in the middle of
Okay.
Manhattan, and then yeah, 6 months later, the guy's just
Wow.
smashing it. And so it's possible, but it's a lot of work. And I don't, I think people are just happy to like have the pain gone, at that point. So
Yeah, I
um
got you.
yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's tough with IBD, right? I hear it all the time. And
Understood.
but that's our motto, is ride, inspire, challenge at Ride for IBD. And that's, we want to ride to inspire people, to show that you can challenge the narrative. And if that means that the narrative is being challenged by performing at the highest level of cycling, which we're trying to do in some cases, or
Mm.
it's just participation because that's, it's the challenge of being able to overcome, or it's taking your kids to the park. It's like, it varies in degree because it's where, I want people to meet themselves where they're at and what their goals are. And so it's not about being a professional. It's about quality of life. So that's why I say that. But
Yeah. So before we jump into Ride for IBD, could you just go back in time and talk us through what's been your approach to get yourself into remission and also stay in remission for so long? Like what's been the
yeah.
toolkit that you've developed for yourself, and how do you approach your own gut health now? Because there'll be learnings in there for the listeners for sure.
Yeah, there's a ton. And I think in the days that we live in now, there's so much influence with social media that it
Mm.
leads people down these sort of rabbit holes and this what I call inconsistencies. So the thing that I learned as an athlete is that it's not about what you do on one day, it's about what you do on accumulative days to get to the end point. So it's consistency because you have to establish a baseline. And that baseline is something that you work off of, right? So, you can't we all start by crawling before we walk, before we run. And that's the same thing I think when you approach your gut health, when you approach your lifestyle around gut health and, more severe conditions like inflammatory bowel disease or autoimmune conditions in general. So it's establishing first and foremost that you have to have a place that you can create a foundation off of. And that's what I did. So, for me, that was first and foremost to get me out of the hospital was like a medication, that's the realization. There was nothing else in that moment that was going to, keep me from having my colon removed. But once the medication, and specifically like a biologic that, had to be infused and, very, it's no joke. It's a serious thing. But once that took hold and it reestablished sort of a balance in the gut in terms of taking the inflammation down, stopping the body from attacking itself and repairing the colon, then you can kind of look at like, it was this natural progression of like, okay, the first and foremost was food. Food became the next thing because I was on a liquid diet. Then it became eating normal food and then figuring out, I talk about this all the time, and probably people have heard me talk and probably like, okay, shut up, Cory. But the thing that stuck out to me the most, and I still think about today, was after being in the hospital, being on a liquid diet, and not being able to eat for a few weeks because of the condition. The first thing I was given was a grilled cheese sandwich.
Oh
And
man.
it was the best tasting thing, but it was like
It's not good
this.
for gut health.
Yeah. And it was funny because my gastroenterologist told specifically, give this guy a grilled cheese sandwich, has protein, some fat, and I'm like, it's white bread, fried, and my God, it tasted amazing. I'm not gonna lie.
Sure, it tasted very good.
Yeah, it was like just this massive disconnect though. And it was kind of this point where I kind of always go back to that because it's like, here I am, like having like what I'm trusting this individual, and yeah, bless his heart. But, he's been my gastroenterologist for a long time. He just retired, but I always mention this story. And I think that was the crux of it of like, okay, I got to get serious. So when I left the hospital, I started
Yep.
working with an expert in nutrition, someone that kind of has their PhD out of Duke University and still work with today. And so that was the big one. Let's figure out, and we can get into that, but I started living
I would love to. Yeah, I would
a
love to dig
metabolic
into
based
that.
diet. So we looked at my blood lipid profile and kind of determined like based on how the lipid profile looked, we sort of determined kind of the ratio of carbs, fat, and protein that I should be eating. And then we kept, the athletic side in mind. First and foremost was just getting that lifestyle, the body back. And then we looked at, because we wanted to see like, how do I metabolize these nutrients, and like what does my, because people can like have a good indication of like, sometimes they say like, oh, I eat a carb and I gain weight like instantly. Or these people who can just, shovel carbs down and like they're just lean as can be. And there's some nuance to that, right? The body can process things sort of differently for different people in different ratios. And so kind of figuring out, kind of taking the guess out of like, what I should be eating, and then creating a roadmap. And that was consistency in the diet every day, eating at, kind of adding, he's really big into like, meals and snacks and kind of getting regularity into there. And then kind of looking at key foods that really are triggers for IBD or IBS and sort of tailoring that. And so I was really, really open to that because as an athlete, I knew how individualistic, training can be. So when it came to
Yep.
diet, I knew that it needed to be individualistic as well. So that was a first big step. And that's
Mhm.
sort of this baseline. It's like, okay, let's get the inflammation, under control. Let's start with exercise and diet, probably diet before the exercise, but then because I had to have the energy to be able to do the exercise. And it became exercise at that point. And then, and when I say exercise, we're talking about let's start with, maybe playing a little basketball on the street or something.
Okay.
Let's
That,
start
yeah.
with like walks. Let's start with because my hematocrit was so low. I was like 35 when I left the hospital. And I thought
Wow.
that's, it's really low. So for those of you that don't know, that's how much, oxygen is in my red blood cells. And there wasn't a lot. So it was like living at altitude, for a few months, even though I was living at sea level.
Wow.
So
Wow.
playing a little bit of basketball, I would sleep for a few hours after. And so it, was kind of in conjunction with the medical team of like, I was on iron, I was getting, infusions of iron and things like that at the time to bump up that hematocrit. But once we got to a place where all of a sudden the body was getting that sort of baseline back, then you could start layering. And that's sort of where I went from lying on my back to crawling and then to walking. And then within like 6 months, I was kind of back to training like more properly once things kind of,
Mm.
kind of balanced out. And so from that point, then you could say, okay, like, what's the training look like? And then kind of looking at fatigue in mind, right? Like we have to take in consideration your
Mm.
gut health and then it's just, okay, like sleep patterns, mental health, supplements, like those are sort of the next kind of steps once you kind of achieve different levels. And then the team was like, okay, you had the nutritionist, you had the coach, you had the person that looked after like the mental side. Then you had the chiropractor. That's a big one for me. Not a lot of people think about, but there's the kinetic chain. If you sit on a plane for a long time and you get tight hip
Mhm.
flexors, you kind of wonder why you're bloated. Those run right past your colon. They anchor at the back of your pelvis.
That's
So
interesting.
like I've noticed as an athlete, if I get twisted on the bike, you're in the gym, you're pushing your body to a level, you kind of wonder like, why am I sort of bloated? And all of a sudden, your SI joint gets popped and, readjusted and, maybe your lumbar spine and your T spine get adjusted. And all of a sudden you run to the bathroom. You're like, oh, what just happened? But,
Wow.
your nervous system runs through your spine and goes directly to your
Yep.
colon. We know that from the gut brain axis, the vagus nerve, different
Yep.
things. So,
So you very much feel like it's all
it's all interconnected,
interconnected then. Yep.
100%. And so, as the body is returning, you kind of all of a sudden you notice my sleep gets better at the same time that my diet's sort of clicking, the weight loss starts to happen, the energy is there, the mental side is there. All these things start to come in place. And
Mm.
I was actually reminded of that. I was this past fall, I was hit by a car and had a traumatic brain injury. And so that kind of threw me for, a major loop and I'm still on the recovery from that. But what that kind of reiterated was that the body started to recover kind of holistically together. Everything was kind of, you had these gradual steps. And then it was like once my sleep started to get better, all of a sudden, the weight loss came back, started to happen again. The inflammation was going down. So I think this is across the board, right? It's as the recovery happens. So these are the kind of things. I mean, when I recommend to somebody, it's kind of it's start with a baseline. Like that's my number one thing. Look at getting what's going on, the underlying condition under control. But it's not just the medication. It's like diet, exercise, your mental health. It's try to establish a lifestyle, and that's what I try to
Yes.
preach today. It's you're especially with your gut, you're living with it for the rest of your life. Your microbiome is going to be there with you for the rest of your life. Inflammatory bowel disease, unfortunately, right now is there with for the rest of your life. You have to create a lifestyle, right, to kind of manage that, but you can do it effectively. And then so that's what I also want to reiterate is you can thrive. I mean, I'm an example. There's plenty of other people that are examples, and so I think if you can start with that, you can create really a wonderful life full of health and happiness.
With regards to the stack that you put together, and that was really inspiring, by the way. So thank you for sharing that with all of our listeners and for me, actually. I really appreciated all of that. With regards to your stack, are you able to share a little bit about um what's kind of different between now and before your diagnosis? So if you're competing in a race, are you able to have these really energy dense gels, for example? Is your pre-race nutrition sort of during race nutrition, post-race nutrition all the same? Or have you had to adapt everything and sort of fine tune to make sure that it's not inflaming and sort of irritating and aggravating your gut?
Yeah, there's some nuance to it for sure. I think because once I established, working with a dietitian and someone that's a PhD in this, like that has a really good window into kind of what my body's doing sort of metabolically. The diet doesn't change too much in terms of
Hmm.
that base diet. What we're doing is like we might preload a little bit in terms of if there's a hard training or a hard event. We're kind of looking at maybe 2 days out, like I'll add more starch into the diet. So I'm someone that I'm very much affected by certain types of foods. I think people could say, "Oh, I ate this raw onion and I had diarrhea." And you're like, "Okay, well, maybe that's probably not the thing for you," right? Like, so I'm kind of in that boat where um, it depends on what country I'm in. So if I'm in Europe, I tend to do better with certain ingredients
Interesting.
as opposed to the United States. So I will alter my diet depending on the region. And so, but I'm someone who eats when it comes to starches, I'm like white rice, potatoes. That's kind of my staple. Um, Very little bread in the US.
Mm.
It's just not of the same standard, yeah,
Yep.
as Europe. But I'm in Europe, I eat a little bit more bread, and so. But for me, in general, I'm kind of preloading a little bit, so I'll add more starch into the diet, maybe 2 days out from an event, and we have these sort of what we call is like I don't know, my nutritionist kind of deems it as like the preload meal, and it sounds gross, but it'll just be like white rice or like a rice cereal with a bit of almond butter, a bit of jam, and some fruit. And so we're kind of balancing out. When we eat under like the diet that I eat, it's about really, having fat sugar combinations, protein fat combinations. So, you're not eating a ton of off the bike, just starches or simple sugars by themselves. It's usually in combination to balance the blood sugar out. So I don't have these massive spikes. If anything, we might have like a piece of fruit before bed to kind of spike you and then drop you into a deeper sleep. But really, it comes down to like the pre-race nutrition the morning of. It's pretty standard, like 3 hours before. We don't want to eat anything high fibrous. Um, yeah, the night before, I'm not like sometimes I'll eat steak. Sometimes I'm a big fish person. So I try to eat things that I'm not going to have to deal with in the morning. But it depends on the
Gotcha.
start. So if it's a 6 a.m. start, which, we're doing some of these off-road events and you might have to be, it's a 4 a.m. wake up, or if you're racing on the road, it might be a 12 a.m. start. So you kind of have to think about multiple meals. So there's that. So, I'm trying to eat things that are easily digested. So
Yeah.
if I'm eating cruciferous foods, I'm eating it's steamed like heavily, right? I'm not trying to eat raw broccoli. I'm trying to avoid paraffin coated things like pears and apples. I might be eating organic applesauce with some almond butter. And then when it comes onto the bike, what I'm trying to do is, it goes back into there's a big push right now in the industry in cycling and running about high carbohydrate consumption. And so you're seeing the envelope pushed at 100, 120 grams per hour. And that's become very generalized. And so the general public is starting to do that. But I'm hearing more and more people approach me saying, I'm having such gut distress when I'm doing this in a race. I'm having such bloating and I can't, and I've tried this and it just doesn't work for me. And I think it goes back to, am I able to process it? And then there's this like notion of
Yeah.
like, oh, you just need to train your gut. Well, what does that mean? If I like you just want me to keep shoving this food that's now going to ferment in my gut because I'm not processing it and it's, causing bloating. It goes back to, I think, that individual side where it's like,
Brilliant.
I have to find that balance. And so it also is product specific. So I think if you're really able to process high carbohydrate diets, both on and off the bike, you'll know. You'll know if you're able to do that because you'll see it in how effective it is in your performance. But I've tried sort of this high carbohydrate side and had really poor effect. I gained weight. I had a lot of water retention, which
Mm.
affected the hematocrit, which affected my sleep. So
Mhm.
once I found that balance again and I brought back in the ratios, I'm about 40% carbohydrate, 30% fat, 30% protein.
Gotcha.
That's about my ratio. Um,
Gotcha.
yeah. So then kind of going from that point in races, I've always taken the approach of look at the course. Does the course call for, are you doing a headwind? Do you need a little bit more fuel in the tank? Do you need to add a little more octane? Are we doing a climb that requires preloading? And then at the top of that climb, having another gel. And then it comes down to, nowadays they use these sort of, hydrogels, which are trying to break down in the colon. There's some gels out there that, and I've had actually poor success with that. I tend to really do well with the older style, which actually break down in the stomach a little bit more and then get processed. So for whatever reason, if I'm having a hydrogel that, it's literally touted as it's going to break down in the large intestine and, be processed there, I don't do well. It just
Oh,
causes issues for me. So it's
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 maybe
about
too
finding
engineered.
yeah, it's about finding the right fuel balance for me. And then the other thing is salt. I'm really affected by salt. And I think there's enough literature about, IBD and salt for people to kind of explore a little bit and how that, plays into the gut microbiome and looking at its effects on IBD and TNFA alpha and things like that, where it begs to, from a personal perspective, if I eat a high sodium diet, which we see in a lot of these processed foods, um, I have negative consequences from that. So I'm also like on the bike, really trying to avoid too much salt. I'm not someone that cramps, so I don't really have to worry about high sodium content. So that's another thing is sodium bicarbonate is a big push right now, and then I think that
Yeah.
people really need to look into that before they really dive into shoving thousands of milligrams of sodium in prior to an event. So there are things. So that's how I kind of approach it. I look at the event, I look at the course, and I determine the diet, and I add a little bit in, and then that fluctuates through the year. You're training. If you're training more, you're going to burn more calories. We have to add more fuel in, just as a general amount per day. So it's a little bit more nuanced, but I think that's kind of a good indication.
It's really helpful. And do you have a view on what the kind of optimal diet is for gut health? Having been on this journey now and spoken to lots of experts and so on, both for someone with IBD, but also maybe just for
Yeah,
a general like layperson listener who's really interested in just improving their gut health further.
I think if you're just looking to improve on a basic level. And people come to me all the time asking this because even with IBD, you kind of at the far extremes of gut health, because it's a bit more, there's a bit more consequences there, I think. But the number one thing is people generally don't know what they need to eat. Like there's just a misunderstanding. We have a very low education in terms of food science in the United States.
Mm.
And just an understanding of, yeah, I think people try to take one product and think that this is gonna be the change that's necessary, and it's more of establishing, again, that lifestyle. It's it you know, understanding that certain
The baseline.
foods a baseline, exactly right. So, I'm always a big proponent if you have the financial, ability to start working with somebody, even if it's, once a month, once every 3 months, someone that has some knowledge to give you sort of a
Mm.
generalized perspective of moving forward. I think it goes back to, we're influenced by social media a lot, and people
Yeah.
hear about a particular product, or hear about, "Oh, just, you should be keto." Well, I mean, if you have heart disease, like, it's probably not best thing for you, right? Like, so, or if you have diabetes, maybe a high carbohydrate diet's probably not recommended, So,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
I
It's
think
true.
it's a nuanced approach. So, like, we kind of get influenced by that. So if I would say first and foremost, cut the noise out. Try to establish, like, you go see a doctor for issues, go see someone that's trained in this for this particular issue. You don't go to we go to the gym and you just kind of like, you're only going to get so far on your own. So working with somebody, I think that's good. I think there are a lot of helpful tips out there. If you have like, there's like the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, or you have nutritional therapy for IBD.org. Like, there's baseline places to start on, like, helping you figure out your diet. There's a lot of tools out there. So I think starting there, just getting a little bit of generalized education and kind of cut through the noise. So if people could want to, and it's free, like that's the best way to do it. And
Yeah,
then
man.
from that point, it's maybe journaling things, like simple things. It sounds kind of corny, but like if you eat something or you keep kind of record, you have a way to kind of pinpoint, like
Yeah.
there's MyFitnessPal, it's free. Go sign up for it, write your diet down for a week and see what happens. Like it'll point things out. It'll show you, oh shoot, I just ate 4,000 milligrams of sodium today. If the recommended amount is, 2,300, like I just doubled it. Is that a problem? How are your bowel habits? Kind of taking stock of what's going on. Start with that. Again, then you could start crawling. And then you could say, okay, can I add a probiotic? And educate yourself of that. No probiotic is the same, right? There's, if you're
Yeah.
buying something on a shelf as opposed to refrigerated, there's
Yeah.
probably a difference. So,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
don't,
Definitely.
So that's my 2 cents is like, I kind of, when people come to me, I say, what's your lifestyle? What are you doing right now? And if you're eating at Chick-fil-A every day or, eating at McDonald's, there's probably some room for change that would probably instantly, have,
Right.
some positive impacts. And then
Yeah. Before
going,
you go and
okay,
spend
yeah,
$100 on a
yeah,
prebiotic, probiotic, the top of the
it's not that
line.
hard. It's
Yeah.
it's not that hard. It's lifestyle choices, simple lifestyle choices. I mean, are you eating Captain Crunch cereal versus maybe
Yeah.
having you have an air fryer, put some potatoes in it and cook it without any oil. Like simple, like it's
Yep.
not too difficult. So I think start with that. Oh, don't overcomplicate it. And that's what social media seems to start doing. It's like, you know, uh if you take this broccoli extract, you'll be fine. Like science shows this is improving your hair follicles and your gut health. Like don't. No, just just stop. Like, just stop. Like, there's no trick. Like, it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
You just got to do the basics and do them super well. Like
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
the best starting point.
Absolutely.
So tell us then about Right for IBD and your mission, your vision. Like, what's your North Star, and
Yeah.
um, how 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 did you come up with the concept? Because it seems like it's
Yeah.
got quite a bit of momentum now, which is
Yeah,
really
it does.
exciting.
Well, first and foremost, like, let's go back to that story of the guy who's taking enemas and suppositories. And I was at a teen camp in Lake Tahoe, and when you're up at altitude, you're in these cabins, and so we did altitude training to prepare for heart races and stuff. So I remembered I was in this room with like 5 bunk beds. It's like this big cabin, and the team's like all sleeping in the room, and I had to take enemas and suppositories, and I'm like, I don't want to leave them lying around. Like that's one, that's disgusting. But like, I had to hide it, and so I had to hide the treatment that I needed that was necessary to take care of myself, and I had to hide what I was going through, and that was a big thing for me because it was embarrassing. So I think anytime you're hiding something, you're never able to fully recognize your full potential, and you can't really treat something in a manner without being outwardly like open with yourself. And so that was a really big moment for me because it kind of laid this groundwork of what others are going through. And I started to see the same examples of what I was going through in that early stages, and then going through what I did. Like it, for anybody that's had IBD or doesn't know what inflammatory bowel disease is, there's a point where the disease takes over. It creates, fissures in your gut. It starts to, you have that leaky gut happening. You start to have ulcers. The gut, basically, that lining is inflamed. It starts to shrink. There's blood. There's mucus. There's things that it basically starts shutting down. Your body's attacking itself, and so it becomes debilitating. And people go through these things called flares, where the disease kind of flares up. It might be active at various stages. For me, it put me like I was sleeping on the bathroom floor. I was curled up in a ball. I had such pain. It was just absolutely debilitating. So that for me, like, left this imprint in my mind of like, no matter what I experience on the bike, nothing will ever come close to that struggle. And so hearing the stories of others, and as I overcame the disease and became a professional, like I became pro after I was diagnosed and in the hospital. It was in that recovery, and I realized my dream. And then once I did that, I became more open about what I was going through. And I could have started to get more in conversation about, hey, I'm dealing with this. And then I became more comfortable in my own skin about the condition. And I just didn't care about like what I thought it became almost like, I wouldn't say superpower, but it became a notch on my shoulder. Like, I'm going through this and I'm achieving this. And so what I
Mhm.
realized is cycling is this beautiful platform of a sport. It's like, we all know the freedom you get from riding a bike, but
Yep.
like, not too many sports can you have this, platform of where you're wearing like, it's very expressive, self-expressive. You kind of dress the way you want. You're out there on the roads. People see it. Sometimes they make fun of you, but but
In the lycra.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Hey, Lance, I used to get that all the time. But yeah, but it's a way to be self-expressive, and the whole business model of cycling is it's like F1 where you're on TV and there's sponsors, being shown. It's giving advertisement and TV time. So that kind of clicked for me of like, this is kind of a way to kind of be self-expressive when it comes to IBD. And what really stood out to me was one, when I was diagnosed, there was no good resources available. There was no lifestyle componentry. It was like, take your medication, go about your business. And I go back to that sandwich that we talked about, the grilled cheese sandwich. That was the disconnect. There was no one, the gastroenterologist even didn't have a lifestyle choice for me, didn't have a pathway. And so I had to create that for myself. So I said,
Mm.
well, I figured this out for me and I know the resources are out there. What can I do to use cycling as my platform to start to talk about the condition? Because we're not going to get anywhere until we talk about it. And I'm highly influenced by those stigmas that have kind of um, made IBD a joke. And that's like, yes,
Mm.
it involves a bathroom. Yes, there's stool. Yes, there's blood. And there's no real beautiful way to kind of, put it out there. And so I was highly influenced by it's almost like jokingly. It's just, like ask me about my poop t-shirt that I got in the mail from a foundation. And it was like, you think I'm going to wear this brown shirt that says ask me about poop? Like, I'm not. Like, you're joking. Like, this is ridiculous. So that was like, there's a disconnect here, right?
Yep.
And so
There is.
I decided, okay, during COVID, we were all locked in the house. We all know what it feels like to now be isolated. That's what people with Crohn's and colitis are going through when they're in a flare. They're stuck. They lose their freedom. Cycling gives that freedom. So I decided, okay, let's create an online thing with Zwift, with Crohn's and Colitis Foundation in the US, and let's have a worldwide IBD ride while we're all stuck indoors. We want something to do. And I called it Ride for IBD. And that was sort of the genesis. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to start using cycling to kind of promote
Uh-huh.
IBD awareness. And yeah, I had my story got out there. Some pharmaceutical companies wanted to share it. The Crohn's and Colitis Foundation had me writing blogs. So I had this kind of advocate side already
Yep.
kind of brewing. And then one thing that clicked for me was I love Red Bull, not the drink, but the brand. And uh,
They do
I
it pretty good, don't they?
they do it great,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, they
great.
do.
And you could
They
see,
do it
like, so
good.
this helmet that I hear was the genesis of Ride for IBD. Make it visible, make it cool, just like Red Bull inspires their athletes. You see the brand, you see the helmet, the athlete
Yep.
out there, and you're like, "Dang, this like, they stand out." And it
Yeah, they do.
added this, you took a drink and you made it a cultural, uh, fashionable thing. And so I was like, let's do that for IBD. Let's go beyond the narrative. Let's break that and let's show people challenging it. Let's wear that helmet. Let's go out there. Let's do some cool stuff. And that kind of spiraled into like at the end of 2023, at the height of my professional road career, I decided, you know what? No, I'm going to start Ride for IBD and I'm going to ride in the jersey. I'm going to find races that I can go all over the world. I'm going to wear my own kit and I'm going to advocate for people. And it's just starting with changing the way we visually see it. Like, so visual awareness, right? Because that's
Mm.
where we got to start. We got to lay on our backs, then we got to crawl. Keep going back to that adage, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
where we're at now is in year 2 of being fully committed to this. We have 6 athletes, 3 elite athletes, and these others are ambassadors who are wearing the jerseys. The jerseys are available, but what it is it's now promoting a lifestyle. We want to showcase
Mm.
events, and so we're really focusing on off-road cycling at the moment because it's one of the areas of the sport that are really taking off. And I said like gravel cycling, for example, and it's something that anybody can do from the professional to the first time participant. these are all expo-based events. And so you have 6,000 people. Like we just went to an event recently called Sea Otter Classic. 80,000 people are attending.
Wow.
It has worldwide coverage. You have an ultimate platform where you have people who are there to watch, there to participate, there to race, and it has worldwide coverage. And you could throw a jersey in there. You could throw athletes in there that are promoting IBD awareness. Now you're getting the conversation to start happening, and people go, "Oh, I have IBD. I want to learn more." That's the genesis for them to go, "What do I need to do for my lifestyle to change that?" And now in year 2, we have partners who my thing is, when you make that first engagement, what can you do to help people's lifestyle? So it comes down to, there's that disconnect with the gastroenterologist. We have a company like Sonar MD, which, one of the things, you might go to gastroenterologists infrequently every 3 months, and they ask you, "Hey, how you doing?" Well, you want me to give you 3 months of like what's going on? Like, you can't. So it's really hard, right? And so something like a Sonar MD gives you a questionnaire every few weeks of like, 10 simple questions asking about your IBD state. That goes and gets sent to your gastroenterologist. So now every time you go in, they have the 3
That's
months
interesting.
worth of what's going on. And then there's lifestyle recommendations in there. There's dietary recommendations, there's movement recommendations. So now you're creating the coach for the IBD patient, right? And then you have companies that are trying to produce more drugs that are effective, that are in combination. So that's why I'm going to biotech conferences now, because there's a role to be played there. So think of the patient as the hub of the wheel. The spokes are all the components to create the entirety of the wheel, right? And that's the lifestyle. And so that's what
And
Ride
when
for IBD is all about. We're about creating a lifestyle by writing, inspiring, and challenging the narrative. So we're doing challenging events that give a platform, that inspire others to ask the questions, what can I be doing to better my life? And then give them the roadmap. So where we're going
Yep.
is, it's all baby steps. So, next thing is really building up our resources, or the website. It's very basic at the moment, but that's where we got to go. We got to have the funding to be able to do that. We're the only team in the world that's going around promoting IBD awareness on a global stage, participating in these mass, participated events with high visibility. And for me, it's called Project Visible, making this aware, making this seen, and doing it really cool. Like, if you go and look at our clothing this year, it's cool. Like, it's fashionable, like for cycling, and it's not corny. Like, people want to buy it and want to wear it. And that's how we change it. So someone's going to be now riding their bike on the street and see that and be like, IBD, I have that. I know somebody with that. That's really
Yep.
cool. They're
Love
open
that.
with it. So
Love it.
that's my mission. And so, I would love to continue to race even into, the retirement years from professional. Like, this is where we're at. So I'm still, challenging myself personally. Um, I'm dealing with a traumatic brain injury now, so that's kind of like changed things a lot, but it's
Right.
given me the ability to, help others. And we're just growing our team. We're growing our platform. We're in Europe. We're in the United States. If you look at like who's coming to our website, it's people from all over the world. So this is a
That's great.
global issue. And we're just trying to give people a really cool platform and a lifestyle and a culture to kind of attach to. So that's what we're doing. A little bit long-winded, but
No, that was
yeah.
perfect. That was so you're set up as a
No, we're
charitable
not actually.
organization?
No,
No.
no, we're actually a cycling team. So we're set up as a brand, as a team. We're working on the charitable
Okay.
aspect of it. Yes. So
Gotcha.
I started as a team. It gives me a little bit more flexibility to have the movement be a bit more global, whereas the
Yep.
charity, it's a bit more country dependent. So,
Gotcha.
but we're working with charities, and so when you when we go to an event and we're localized, like let's say we are in Arizona, for example, we're going to connect you with a localized partner. So like the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation in Arizona, because that's that when we leave that event, you're left like going, okay, what's the resources available? So that's our focus, is like being this team that empowers people. But we're working on, that's the next big step for us, is forming the foundation. So my goal is to have the grant. So if you're living with IBD, we can grant you some money to help you kind of achieve your sporting stuff. But
Yeah,
it's all in the process. So being able to try to start it all at once as an individual who's training
Yep.
and doing all that is a lot. So that's our next big step. And we're working on that as we speak. So I'm really excited
Okay.
for that. But yeah,
Well, I can hear the passion oozing out of
yes.
your voice when you're talking about it, which is really nice. Just love that. Um, and as I said right at the start, it's a very inspirational story, what you've been through to continue to perform at such a high level. And now this vision to scale the impact globally and to help others who are wanting to achieve in their domain, and also just sort of more generally, if anyone's got an IBD diagnosis. It's novel. I haven't heard anything like it before,
Yeah.
which is really cool. And tell us then, what do you hope happens over the course of the next couple of years in terms of your plan, and how can people follow the story and get involved?
Yeah. So really, I mean, the goal is that you would see. I'm looking at beyond just cycling. So the number one goal is to kind of look at people living with gut related issues and IBD, trying to participate in multiple sports. I want to I want to be able to roll up to a bike race with a mobile awareness unit. So it's basically, if you saw a team come up to a bike race, see them come up in their bus, and everybody rolls out with the bikes, and there's the mechanics and stuff. I want that for IBD. I want to be able to go to events, be able to have sort of an elite level people who are racing, that being sort of that like inspirational thing, but then we're able to help those who are just trying to participate. So that's our goal, is to be able to have a bigger presence at these expos and sporting events, and then have the foundation that supports the development of people with IBD in sport. That's the number one thing. And to really mainstream that maybe you don't have that colon and you want to be a professional. How do we help you do that? So that's my goal. That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see the furthering of a lifestyle, and to have the resources that when you come to either our site or you connect with us, that there's a pathway forward for you to like that guy in the hospital who ate the grilled cheese sandwich, who said, what do I need to do to fix my life
Yep.
and to overcome this, and to have that for everybody. And that's my goal. We're at a place with sport, and sport is really kind of, I think, pushing the boundaries of human performance. And we've become so blessed to have wearable devices, and this goes back to your question at the beginning of what's the difference in the development from your development to now, and how is it different? Well, people have HRV monitors now. People have specific diets now in sport. Like it's gotten to the degree of which you can tailor the human performance has gotten so high that we're seeing these feats of athletic endeavors that are just mind blowing. Like you used to have to train for, like Lance Armstrong, put aside all the things that he did, whatever. His whole season was based around the Tour de France. So everything he did was to get ready for the Tour de France. If you look at Tadej Pogacar now, he's going to every race to win it. Like it's like the Tour is just a part of the season. It's like
Wow.
they're
Yep.
racing full gas every race. How do you do that? It's because they're able to have the diet, have the
They're
lifestyle.
so dialed in.
You have to be dialed. And so how do you help people on the basic level of living with gut health issues, living with lifestyle desires, living with IBD? It goes down to like smartwatches, right? Like your Apple Watch, your Whoop gives you a window into your base heart rate, gives you an idea of variable heart rate. That's a window into fatigue. Are you fatigued? Can you handle the day? Do you need to back it down? Like having some metrics to go off of, I think, is the number one thing for people. And that sport is really good at. And that's the disconnect, I think, right now, is sports science and generalized medicine don't talk to each other very well.
Yep.
And there's a lot of
100%.
gut things that are really found out in sports science or fatigue management or human performance that really translate well into generalized medicine. It's just there is that disconnect.
Wow.
And so that's my mission, is to like connect those things. But people can really do well with like simple, easy devices. Your iPhone is a window into some technology that will revolutionize your training. You go to ChatGPT right now and type in a diet
Yep.
for, a a phenotype that you might have in your metabolic profile, you can get a pretty good response.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty good. I'm not
It's
gonna lie.
quite incredible. It's quite
I've
incredible.
tested against my metrics, and it's like,
Yeah,
that's
really
pretty darn
good.
close. So
Yeah.
that's the future.
really
We're gonna hyper performance the generalized public in, I think,
So-
a few years. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you just, because this is truly deeply fascinating. Can you just walk us through how do you use the heart rate variability, and how do you prioritize your sleep, and how can the general person take away some key findings?
Yeah,
if you like, from all of that?
that's so easy for anybody to do. Like, I have literally an app on my phone. It cost me $10. It's called HRV for training. I mean, or you can get a Whoop, or you can get
Yep.
other wearable devices that track this stuff. So, okay, when you're as an athlete, we track fatigue. As fatigue is heightened, as more fatigue happens, you need some fatigue to make
Adaptation.
adaptation and performance gains. But too much fatigue, it breaks the body down. So when you're living with gut related issues, when you're living with IBD, fatigue is a big deal. So this goes back to people not having any direction, right? Just kind of whimsically going to the gym, whimsically going for a run. That's fine. That's called exercise. But when you're trying to create a goal, exercise in itself will only get you so far, right? There's that plateau we talked about with certain young athletes. And these wearable devices, for example, when you wake up in the morning, I'm laying prone, so on my back. I check my base heart rate and I check my variable heart rate. It's a window into the fatigue metrics and the cardiovascular fatigue that I have. It'll spit out a score. It'll spit out recommendations. Then about 5 minutes later, I stand up and I take one more measurement in the vertical position. And I look at the differences between the two. And I notice that if there is more than a 10% of a jump, I'm in a high fatigued state. So I need to back down the intensity of the training. And really, but that's a window into generalized fatigue. So if you're running, we had an athlete who was flaring at an event this past week in Sea Otter Classic, and he's like, "Should I race tomorrow?" And I said, "No, absolutely not. You're flaring. Like, that fatigue is just through the roof." So he ended up going home and couldn't race. And the first thing I would recommend is like rest. Get that inflammation under control. And that's the same thing in life. If you're going to work and you're flaring, you're not going to be able to handle much more, so it's why go and push your body. Those are the simple metrics that will give you an indication of, am I in a good place? And that's like, it costs nothing. It's $10 for the app. It's like, it's so easy. I mean, a blood pressure machine, like, you can get it through your insurance. You can get it for $30 at the local grocery. Like, looking at, how pre and post exercise, like, where's my blood pressure at? That's a great indication of also, like,
Yep.
if I have low blood sugar, like, where's my diet at? Like, there's so many simple metrics that can really, I think, change the way. Again, MyFitnessPal is free. Like, you can track your diet, right? Like, there's so many cool things out there. So those type of metrics will help you kind of get a window into the basics of have a generalized knowledge of where you're at. So you're not taking a shot in the dark. I think I'm going to do this today, because without that consistency, you're never going to advance. You got to have a baseline to start from, and then you make the micro adjustments, because you can see the changes. So that's when we want to talk about a probiotic. If the baseline diet is great, right, and you have a place to go in and you start incorporating a probiotic, you can see the change. What's my bowel habits look like? So did it improve my bowel habits? And I can only do that if I know, hey, I've been eating relatively the same way, in the same pattern. Then all of a sudden you can see, oh, my stools are improved greatly. The bloating has gone down. Those are the types of things that, like, start with those basics, start with those free things, and then start layering it if you have a desire to go beyond that.
I love that.
That's how I look at it.
I love that. I've just made a personal commitment to actually follow the data that my Whoop is spitting out at me, because I'm just unwell, actually, for the first time in 5+ years, and was reflecting on how does this happen? Because my diet's dialed. I'm exercising 5+ times a week. I take supplements when required. I think I prioritize my sleep. I do sauna, I do infrared, I do pretty much everything. And then I actually looked at all the data and I could see my recovery score was going from, high 80s, so really green, down to amber, almost at red. And then I had this period where very stressful personal circumstance and still trained really hard, international travel. And then it went to red. And it went red for a whole week.
Mm.
And I think that, and I'm back now, I'm back to green today for the first time in 7 days, but I was reflecting on that and I was like, okay, so if I had just not trained that week or just done some swimming or just done some walking and not done the CrossFit and not tried to run up and down that mountain and maybe dialed back the work intensity for a little bit, I wouldn't have lost that week,
Mhm.
you know? So, so, and I think often, I've got the whoop, I've had the whoop for years. I just ignore it and go, "Bruh." But
Yeah.
what you're saying is if I was a professional athlete, I would see that and I've got to dial it back because there's a level of fatigue.
Sure, but there's a level of periodization, right? So if anything, like, this doesn't matter who you are. Like, if we're talking training, you never start with the hardest day first, right? You build into these hard days. And so
Yep.
there's periodized training in order to, stimulate that fatigue that's going to help you make adaptation. It's, we look at like 12-week blocks. So you have 3 4-week blocks, and that fourth week typically is, a down week or a rest week where you're kind of, the first week builds into the second week, builds into that third week where the adaptation will happen. You have the easy, down week where you back it off, and then you repeat the cycle because the body needs to go, oh, the stimulus is there again. We have to make the adaptation.
Got
So
you.
there's
Got you.
that. And I think, like, understanding the periodized cycle of training, um, but that goes into life as well. Like, I don't want people to think like, and that could be like, I'll give you an example. You're sort of living your life. You have this routine. You go on vacation, and then you're like, oh, I actually lost weight on vacation. Because you kind of relaxed, right? And it's just like
Yeah.
the body got a bit of time to be like, well, yeah, I had the same thing. I was on the road last week, and I came back and I went to my nutritionist, and we did some testing because we do that every few weeks, and I lost weight. I lost body fat, but I didn't stress about, like, my whole thing is, especially with training, all the hard work is done at home. The race is just a
Mm.
test. I'm not stressed if my diet isn't perfect the day before the race. All the work is done. I'm relaxed about it. And
Mm.
so when I'm on the road, you have the flexibility to be relaxed because the diet, the training is done. And so that could, that's also the
Okay.
time for people, just normal people, to be like, my lifestyle is really good. And that doesn't mean go off and just go crazy when you're on the road or you're traveling. It's like, be sensible, but don't don't be harsh on you. It doesn't have perfection does not need to be attained when the environment doesn't allow for perfection to be had, right?
I really appreciate
Perfection is
that.
really good when you're in the controlled environment. You know this from a clinical standpoint. Like, try to beta test something out in the field. It's a lot harder than in the lab, right? Like, try to put it into practice. And that's the one thing I think we get lost in too, especially clinically. What a PhD might come up with in the lab might not translate in the
Yeah.
field, right? Like, so this
Yeah.
whole high carb thing might sound great in the lab. We do see some
In the beer
instances in
well.
the field of performance, but if you took 10 athletes or 10 individuals and you applied that same methodology to each and every one, do you think everybody's going to respond the same? No, they're not. And that begs the question of specificity. Each person has a specific way that they sort of take to a stimulus and how they respond to it. And so that's where it comes back to your gut. You ain't gonna be the same as maybe your neighbor. And so if they say, "Oh, this thing worked really well for me. I did this." That is an indication that's gonna work for you. And I think we get trapped in that a lot. Like, and I find this. I mean, I have a professional career. I have a degree in kinesiology with active lifestyle development. Like, I have some education there. I've been exposed to some great science over my years. I work with some high level professionals. Yet my own family sometimes doesn't listen. You're like, why are
No,
you
no, they'll
listening?
never listen.
No, you're like, what are you doing? Why are you eating that? Like, or like, why are you doing that to yourself? It's like, well, it's just, they're influenced in some ways. And I think that's just the point being is like, find that baseline for yourself.
Yeah.
Don't be so stressed about it. Have some flexibility. I give myself a cheat meal every week. If I'm feeling like eating a burger, I eat the burger, but I don't eat it every day, you know? Um, but I enjoy eating well. It feels good. It's part of me. I have, and this is one that I'm really getting into right now. And I think this can go back to the gut brain axis. And I think this is something that you could probably really expand upon.
Okay.
So I learned this through going through my traumatic brain injury. The first thing, so I was going to the center, still there, still kind of going and working on this. But the first thing they did when having a traumatic brain injury was they did a Myers-Briggs test,
Yep.
and they looked at my personality, and they said, how is this person going to respond? And this goes back to specificity. How's this person going to respond to the stimulus that we're going to get to retrain their brain? If you gave, and I'm an INTJ, so they call it a mastermind, someone that responds to extreme rigidity, extreme structure. Like, it's the rarest of personalities. So I'm told. Maybe someone can like fact check me on that, but this is what they've told me at the center. But I really respond well, and this probably looks to the degree of why I've done well in athletics, because I really stick to a training plan. But why would you give someone that maybe has a different personality type that does not respond well to structure to a
Mm.
highly structured diet, right? Like the
Mhm.
regimen needs to be flexible.
That's
So I think
interesting.
there's specificity in the mind when it comes to
Yes,
looking at how you train an individual. Like,
that's really interesting.
there's a lot of kids who respond really well when you just let them just be like a young athlete and go be aloof, right? Or there's ones that you have to like tie down and say, no, you're doing this. So
That's
everybody,
interesting. I'd never
yeah.
heard of a tie together between some of the personality
Well,
testing
this
and
this
then
was a light bulb moment for me
really
in
interesting.
yeah, that was a light bulb moment for me going through this and learning how my brain is rewiring and going through this injury, right? And how I process stuff. And I think this can get into more in depth of like specificity in how to, medication regimens, dietary regimens, exercise
Yeah,
regimens. Like,
yeah.
maybe the future is you go to a gastroenterologist and they do a Myers-Briggs test on you and say, well, this person might respond to this, and we would give this specified program. And I think that's where like I think the future is happening. So again, like one of our partners is like Sonar MD, and like that's something I kind of tell them is like with their app that's coming out that's going to help people like manage their IBD. Maybe that's an area to look at.
Yeah.
And then you can get into the vagus nerve, right? That gut brain axis. Like if the mental component it's not there, there's a an effect on the gut, vice versa. If
Most
the
certainly.
microbiome is just not in its right place, it's going to affect the mind, right? So there's so many nuances that like, and that's why I think the mind that's where HRV comes in. That's where kind of a window into the nervous system, and that's why I said chiropractic early on. Is the kinetic chain is
Yep.
all interlinked to your nervous system, which is interlinked to your spine, which is interlinked to your brain stem, and so and that's one
Well,
thing
we've done
kinesiology taught
50
me.
episodes. We've done 50 plus episodes. Some of the brightest minds in microbiome and gut health, and no one's ever made the connection from a kinetic chain perspective to how the gut functions. So
Well,
they
they
don't.
should.
They absolutely no. They really should. And we've not even talked about the microbiome yet, but we're at 1 hour 15, and we've covered a whole range of topics. So before we wrap up, it'd be really great to hear how people can follow your journey,
Mhm.
plus Ride for IBD, if they want to learn more and see it expand, and hopefully you achieve all the things that you've set out. So, where
Yeah.
can people find out more?
Well, if you want from a more of a like to get a hold of me directly, LinkedIn is great. You could follow me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest thing to get a hold of me personally. Um, for Ride for IBD is we're on Instagram. That's our main place that we focus on. It's just at Ride for IBD. It's like just the number 4. And then me, it's Cory Mike 23 on Instagram. I try to be as open with my condition as possible, but to follow the movement, Ride for IBD, you can check out rideforibd.com. Like I said, it's very basic, but we are working on expanding that, and follow this journey. Get connected. You can be a part of the Ride for IBD movement. You can get a jersey. It goes to supporting our efforts, and really that gets reinvested into building the foundation that's to come. So it's the best way to get involved. If you see that we're going to be at an event, for example, maybe it's in the UK, follow along, because we would love to meet you. We have ambassadors in the UK as well. So I highly recommend going and reading a story on Ride for IBD about Sam Gray, someone who's from the UK, who was living with Crohn's disease, had sepsis in the hospital, almost died, got connected
Wow.
on that ride I was talking about earlier on Zwift, decided not to commit suicide because that's where he was at because it was so bad. He did
Holy
some
smoke.
podcasts talking about that. And Sam is an inspiration. He's thriving. He's a Ride for IBD ambassador. He's just an amazing person with a great story of IBD. So if you're in the UK, I would highly recommend following him
Thank
as
you.
well. But
Thank you.
yeah, Crohn's and Colitis UK is an amazing organization. I've been in contact with them, also with other organizations throughout Europe. So feel free to reach out. I always answer messages. People reach out to me all the time personally on Instagram, and I always will reply back. So oftentimes I'll give you a phone call. So
Nice.
yeah, and so please do so. Please reach out, and hopefully you'll see us on a bigger, broader stage in the future,
Yeah.
and we can support you if you're living with IBD in more than one way. So
Yeah, I have a
that's how you can go.
really good feeling that you're going to achieve what you want to achieve.
Oh, I appreciate
And
it.
I really wish you all the best. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot. I feel inspired.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the listeners will have loved it as well. So,
Great.
Cory, thank you so much for coming
You're
onto
very
Inside
welcome,
Muscles.
James. Yes.
And it's much appreciated.
Cheers.